Many divers don't understand the true importance of gas planning. Looking down at the gas gauge willy-nilly, ensuring they have enough to get through the dive. This works if all is right. But what if it isn't? What if something goes wrong? Are you leaving things to chance? We, as a dive community, like to come up with 101 scenarios on how to survive an out of gas situation, which is important, but what if the best odds of survival is improving every skill set involved in preventing running out of gas in the first place? In this video, I will go over how to predict how much gas you need on your dive, gas planning that will optimize your recreational diving, and how you can drastically be more prepared and safer in your dives. Be sure to stay till the end too. I have something I'd like to share to help kickstart your gas planning and help make it faster to get started. Imagine you're down deep during a relaxing and beautiful dive for about 30 minutes. Your buddy then turns to you with a look of dread and signals they are out of gas. You take action immediately and begin gas sharing, but then feel a shared sense of panic as you glance at your own gas gauge. Do you have enough? The truth is, most recreational divers operate on dangerously simplistic rules for gas management. The 500 or 50 bar reserve rule taught to you during basic certification is like applying a one-size-fits-all bandage to a complex wound, inadequate and potentially life-threatening. It doesn't help us answer questions like, how much gas will you use during the ascent and safety stop? But how do you make sure you actually do come up with enough reserve to cover an emergency? We shouldn't leave things to fate and chance. With a bit of preparedness, which we'll learn in this video, we can ensure we have the confidence to tackle scenarios like this, even on the most casual of dives. Okay, let's break down what happens during a dive. Water pressure increases approximately 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet or 10 meters of depth. At 80 feet or 24 meters, you're under approximately 3.4 atmospheres of pressure. This isn't just a theoretical number. It directly impacts your gas consumption rate in a very real way. Take a balloon to 33 feet or 10 meters underwater, which is 2 atmospheres of pressure, and it compresses to half its surface size. At 3 atmospheres or 66 feet or 20 meters, it's 1/3 its original size. By 4 atmospheres or 99 feet or 30 meters, that same balloon compresses to just 1/4 of its surface volume. The gas in your tank behaves in a similar way. It expands to ambient pressure so you can breathe normally underwater. This comes at the cost of increased volume. The deeper you go, the more gas you use. But you might ask yourself, what is the practical consequence? At 99 feet or 30 meters or 4 atmospheres of pressure, you breathe approximately 4 times the amount of gas you would at the surface. That's quite a bit more. A tank that might last you 60 minutes in shallow water could be empty in just 15 minutes at depth. Another important point I want to truly instill is that a real emergency often involves 2 people. That's why it's crucial to change your mindset. The gas in your tank is not just for your own use, but also your reserve to safely get 2 people back to the surface. This is where the standard 500 psi or 50 bar reserve becomes potentially dangerous if anything goes wrong. That's why shortly we'll get into how to calculate more precise measurements of what kind of reserve you need for your planned dive, based on depth, and how you can start practicing and ensuring you respect a set reserve for emergencies. At deeper depths of, let's say, 3 atmospheres, both you and your out of gas buddy will consume gas at least 3 times faster than your surface rate during the emergency. And it can be even faster if panic sets in. Professional and technical divers approach this differently. Instead of arbitrary pressure numbers, they use a systematic calculations based on individual or standardized consumption rates, planned depths, and by planning for the worst, avoiding emergencies. Everything should be planned, including the potential for things to go wrong, and the redundancies needed to keep things safe. This methodical approach replaces guesswork with confidence and preparation. What I hope to achieve in this video is introducing these concepts in an easy to learn, approachable manner for even the most casual diver. And you can return to this video if you ever feel a little lost or you need a refresher on gas planning. In a previous video, I covered tips to improve gas consumption, which I'll link to you in the description for later viewing. But in this video, I want to delve deeper into how we can plan our dives to make sure we always have enough gas based on our gas consumption rate. And speaking of planning, I do want to mention that I'm going to be starting an email newsletter to cover the latest and greatest in scuba. It's too much for me to keep up with videos, and I'd rather keep my videos evergreen and lasting with tips and useful things. News kind of comes and goes, but in newsletter format, I have the ability to send out those updates. So if you're interested in subscribing, check it out in the description. You can unsubscribe anytime, and I promise it won't be very spammy. Probably just once a month, and I'd probably be a couple months before I get started. First, we need to start being able to predict the future. This involves building an intuition of how much gas you will be consuming at a given depth while cruising at regular fin speed. This simplified method to measure your gas consumption is fairly straightforward, and I'd love to hear about you giving this a try on your next dive. First, before your dive, check your dive computer to set an alarm for every 5 minutes. Ideally, a silent alarm. Otherwise, you may very well annoy your dive mates, but it's better for you to practice this, so let everyone know and they might be cool with it. If your dive computer doesn't have an alarm, just keep checking it every minute for the 5 minutes and keep a better eye on it. You'd have to get a little creative and make sure you keep your computer in front of you. To start, every time that alarm happens, get in the habit of checking your gas pressure. This is a great habit, and if you somehow build in a 5-minute timer for yourself every 5 minutes to check that gas gauge, I will have accomplished one of my missions with this video. This is a quick habit that will help keep you safe for years to come. With diving, and building that muscle is a good start. There is more we can do here though. So next, I want you to dive down and swim normally, holding your depth at 20 meters or 66 feet. Take note of your starting pressure on the next alarm and swim normally at that depth for 5 minutes until the next alarm. Then check how much your pressure has changed. You now know how much gas you used at 3 atmospheres of depth for a 5-minute interval. All you need is the difference. Here's an example. I dove at 66 feet or 20 meters, starting at 3,100 psi or 210 bar. After 5 minutes, my alarm goes off and my gas gauge reads about 2,600 psi or 180 bar. The difference is 500 psi or 30 bar. Then, since you're checking your dive computer every 5 minutes, it would be easier to project how much you will consume in the next 5 minutes given your depth. If your depth doesn't change, you can now predict the future a little bit. But of course, this is only useful if you stay at 3 atmospheres. If by some chance you ascend up to 2 atmospheres or 33 feet or 10 meters or down to 4 atmospheres or 99 feet or 30 meters, what's going to happen? To do this, we need to convert how much pressure we use every 5 minutes to what we'd use at the surface, and then scale it to the atmospheres we are at. Since we consumed 500 psi or 30 bar at 3 atmospheres, we divide these by 3 to get how much we would have consumed at surface, which gives us 167 psi or 10 bar. Now, that's how much we use every 5 minutes at the surface. From there, if I am at 4 atmospheres, I can quickly do that math to 668 psi or 40 bar. This establishes a fairly good prediction that if I drop to 3 atmospheres, how much I will consume. And you can give this a try yourself. This is a simplified model to make the head math at depth a little easier, and you might toy with it some to match your needs. But as you practice, you'll start building that prediction muscle. This way, you can slowly build that mental projection for what your consumption will be as you continue the dive. And you'll find over time you'll more accurately guess the next 5-minute prediction. And that's where I'd like you to be. You're starting to predict the future of your consumption. And once you have a mental model of your gas consumption rates, that will stick with you forever. This style of testing works on single and double cylinders. Your mental projection might need to adjust based on the internal volume of your cylinders though. It's important to realize that consumption can vary with conditions. Cold water might increase your usage 10 to 15% as your body tries to maintain its temperature. Physical exertion like swimming against current can double your rate. Most significantly, psychological stress during an emergency can spike consumption up to 10 times normal. A sobering fact that highlights why accurate baseline measurements matter. And that's why when you end your dive, I want you to take note of what your gas pressure consumption rate at the surface was throughout your dive, or at least at key moments where you're measuring it, and then take notes of the different things that could have been affecting it. Do note, as a beginner diver, you are going to be a lot more stressed than someone who's been diving for many dives or even years, and that's okay. This is usually a common thing that affects your gas consumption rate. I assure you, the more you dive, things will get better. You will feel more relaxed. So when emergencies happen, you can expect that gas consumption rate to skyrocket. So make sure you note that gas pressure usage and the things that have affected it on your dive. Over a series of mini logs, you'll start getting an idea of what your average gas pressure consumption would be. The goal is to try and approximate your usage and build an instinct around it. And do remember, you can take that gas pressure consumption at the surface and scale it based on the atmospheres to see how much you're going to be consuming for every 5 minutes at the depth you are. It would be good if you have integrated air to go ahead and turn it off for a time and practice this skill without it. Eventually, you might not need it anymore. And if anything, you won't be overly reliant on it. I find this gas consumption rate approach most useful as a mental simplicity while diving, when you always use the same kind of tank. The mental math will have to change a little bit for different gear setups, but even that, you'll get a better idea of how to scale the number with different gear setups as well. While the simplified system works really nicely and is fairly straightforward to get started with, there is an even more accurate way of doing proper gas management. And it starts with a single critical number that many divers never accurately calculated. This is surface air consumption rate, or SAC for short. This is the cornerstone measurement every serious diver needs to know. The volume of gas you breathe per minute at surface pressure. And just to make sure I don't confuse you here, what we were measuring before was gas pressure consumption, so you can see how it affects your PSI or bar on your air gauge. But now we're going to be talking about volume of gas that you breathe. That simplified concept that we introduced was a quick primer to SAC rate. A lot of dive computers with fancy air integration will calculate this number for you, but what if you could build this calculation without relying on technology? Most divers operate on assumptions rather than measurements, labeling themselves or their buddies as good on air or air hogs, based on impressions, similar to assessing your car's fuel efficiency without checking the actual mileage. Let's fix this with a straightforward calculation using equipment you already own and information from your dive logs. The process breaks down into 3 simple steps. 1. Record your starting pressure and ending pressure, dive time, and average depth after you finish diving. 2. Calculate your total gas consumption. You do this by subtracting starting pressure from ending pressure, multiplied by the cylinder volume. This is going to be a lot easier if you use metric, but bear with me if you don't. 3. Divide by time and adjust for depth pressure to determine your surface rate. Sac rate measures consumption at the surface. While underwater, you're breathing under increased pressure. This is where respiratory minute volume, or RMV, comes in. Your actual consumption at depth equals your sac rate multiplied by pressure, or in other words, atmospheres. Let's work through an example, which will help you understand things a little bit better. But bear with me, we're gonna get right into that math. I'll try and display that on the screen for you to follow along. And stay tuned till the end because I will have somewhere for you to reference those formulas. Let's say you started with 3000 psi or 200 bar with an aluminum 80 cubic foot tank or 11 liter tank, which are equivalents. After 45 minutes, you surface with 1500 psi or 100 bar remaining. You'll find this calculation is quite a bit more simple in metric. So let's talk about that first. We take our 200 starting bar minus our 100 in starting bar times our 11.1 liter tank divided by 45 minutes. During the whole dive, you used 24 liters of gas per minute. If your average depth was 20 meters, which is 3 atmospheres, divide by 3 to get your surface equivalent rate of approximately 8 liters per minute. But for reference, this is absurdly good. We'll get to more typical numbers in a moment. Now, we're gonna jump into Imperial. I want to mention, for thoroughness and accessibility for all my viewers, but going into this math might convince you or make you think that maybe doing things in metric is a little bit better. Well, stay tuned because I have a video going into just that. So make sure you subscribe so you get notified when that video drops in the future. First, let's talk about tank factors. These for Imperial are simplifications for the math, which I'm going to go ahead and use here. Common tank factors are known, so you don't really need to calculate them. Just find the tank factor for your tank and use it. For our case, a single HP80 is going to have a tank factor of 2.5. The calculation in Imperial is 3000 start PSI minus 1500 PSI divided by 100 times 2.5 for your tank factor and divided by 45 minutes. During the whole dive, used 0.83 cubic feet per minute of gas. Our average depth was 66 feet, so 3 atmospheres. Then we divide by 3 to get the surface equivalent rate of approximately 0.28 cubic feet. That's your sac rate in terms of gas used in Imperial and metric. Now I'm going to go ahead and display on the screen a good formula to help remember this. Feel free to pause and record it down. But if you're lazy, stay tuned, I have a solution. One thing to note is you don't really need this formula on your dive, so you can put it in your dive log. But what I want you to do is make sure you go through this and calculate your sac rate for every dive to practice doing it and to get a good idea of your sac rate. Also take note of the conditions you were doing in the last exercise. Take note of all the conditions that might have affected your sac rate. Also, feel free to watch this section a couple times to absorb it if you need it. I remember the first time I was introduced to gas planning, I was quite perplexed. it kind of just zoomed right over me, and really I needed to read through it and understand it several times before it started to click. If you're recording this every dive, doing this calculation with your diving will help you remember this calculation off the top of your head with time and practice. Given that every dive has its own conditions and different variables, what you want is a good collection of normal dives with nothing exciting to start getting a strong idea of your normalized sac rate. The value of knowing your personal sac rate cannot be overstated. Two divers of nearly identical builds, fitness level, and experience can have dramatically different consumption rates. Without knowing your personal sac rate, some organizations standardize sac rates to give you a starting point that seems to work. A standard and conservative number you can use without knowing your own sac rate is 0.75 cubic feet per minute, or 20 liters per minute. These are conservative defaults for you to use when you don't know someone's sac rate, including yourself. More typical sac rates can range from 0.46 to 0.63 cubic feet, or 13 to 18 liters. The lower you can go, the better. And now that you know your sac rate, as you do things to improve your own air efficiency, now you have a quantitative way of measuring how much that's impacting your consumption rates. I do highly recommend giving it a try to calculate your sac, as it's a fun way to see how different conditions, finning techniques, gear, temperature, and fitness levels affect your sac over time. The sac rate we just calculated becomes truly meaningful when we understand how it transforms your time underwater. While your surface consumption might seem manageable, depth fundamentally changes this equation in ways that directly impact your survival. RMV becomes a simple calculation of your sac rate to the depth you are at. This is where we can start pre-calculating our gas duration at any depth. To do this, you need three pieces of information: your sac rate, your cylinder's total gas volume, and the planned dive depth. To start, you want to divide your available gas, starting pressure minus a safety reserve, which we'll talk more about shortly, by your depth adjusted consumption, RMV, to determine your minutes underwater. Don't forget to check your NDL, or rather your no decompression limits as well, and use the most conservative limit for the time that you have. For an example, with 77.7 cubic feet or 2,200 liters of gas in your cylinder with a max of 3,000 psi or 200 bar, you'd want to first subtract your safety reserve from the total working pressure. Again, we'll talk more about the safety reserve and better ways to calculate it shortly, but let's use the typical 500 psi or 50 bar safety reserves, which for this tank will reserve about 13 cubic feet or 550 liters, leaving about 64 cubic feet or 1,650 liters for use. Then, diving to 100 feet or 20 meters, approximately 3 atmospheres, with a conservative sac of 0.75 cubic feet or 20 liters per minute. Your gas will last about 27.5 minutes. In metric, that's 1,650 liters divided by 60 liters per minute. Woo, that's a lot of math, but it will get easier in time, I promise. This calculation helps determine your turn pressure, but it doesn't have any additional margins of safety for additional considerations, such as new divers in the group, current, etc. The turn pressure is the ideal point agreed upon by you and those you are diving with, where you effectively turn your dive back to the start location. It's above your safety reserve, and you can even ascend to a shallower depth and explore other areas on your way back. The turn pressure can be somewhat arbitrary, like halfway through the air that you could be using there. So that could be halfway with 13 to 14 minutes at depth, with time to ascend slowly and check out other areas on the way up, or with a minimum ascent profile, ending the dive with a safety stop of about 4.5 minutes. That's including the ascent and the safety stop. You have some wiggle room here with your planning. It's always good to be conservative, so round down. A simple conceptual dive plan to practice and works well to keep you above your safety reserve would be to start your dive to your deepest depth until your agreed upon turn pressure, then start the turnaround heading back to your exit point. And this isn't talking about penetration or anything, it's probably talking about some reef or wall, and as you're turning back you ascend and you can still have a nice relaxing dive and enjoy the shallower areas on your way back. You can explore a new area on the way back, giving you more deco time and keeping above the safety reserve, and importantly, getting back to the exit point within 1 minute of your dive plan. So make sure you practice and you stick with your dive plan. The formula for this looks like what I'm about to show you on the screen. Again, you can pause here, write it down. I will have something for you to reference this if you don't like to write it down. Instead of arbitrarily checking your gauge and hoping you have enough to get back, you can calculate exactly when to begin your return, ensuring enough gas for 2 people based on your consumption rate and dive profile before even starting your dive. That's planning. We'll dive deeper into pressure in a moment. Understanding this depth consumption relationship transforms your approach to gas management. You're no longer diving with vague rules and crossed fingers, but marking calculated decisions based on your actual physics affecting your gas supply. Those calculated decisions based on physics become especially crucial when determining your absolute minimum gas reserve, or what some call rock bottom. This is essentially what we've been calling our safety reserve up to this point, and is often also called minimum gas or rock bottom, whichever you prefer. Both work and mean the same thing. For this video, I'll refer to it as rock bottom reserve to emphasize its importance. When your buddy frantically signals they're out of gas at 100 feet or 30 meters, that standard 500 psi you've been taught to save might be less than half of what 2 divers actually need for a controlled ascent with proper safety stops, given the elevated amount of stress. Rock bottom isn't just another diving buzzword. It's the mathematically calculated minimum gas required for 2 divers to safely reach the surface from your maximum planned dive depth. It accounts for 3 critical phases: the emergency response at depth, the ascent itself, and any stops you want to make along the way. Your goal in all planning and scenarios is to treat your rock bottom reserve as the absolute latest point to start ascending, while still being able to deal with emergencies. It's the red line you should never cross in diving. So all your planning, turnaround points, and conservative estimates should always be above this number. But what's important is that as you ascend, that rock bottom reserve will change, allowing you different rock bottom time that is calculated for shallower depths. So you can buy more time on your dive by simply going shallower. Now, to help drive this home, let's work through an example using some of this theorem. In the worst case, if an emergency did happen during a dive to that 100 feet or 30 meters, we'd need a calculated 7 minutes of gas, 1 minute at depth to recognize the emergency, and establishing gas sharing, 3 minutes to ascend at maximum 30 feet or 10 meters per minute, and 3 minutes for your safety stop. So 7 minutes total. Using your conservative sack rate numbers of 0.75 cubic feet per minute or 20 liters per minute, Let's calculate what this looks like. In 1 minute, at 4 atmospheres, we'd use 3 cubic feet or 80 liters of gas. Then, 3 minutes to ascend. Estimating a minute at each atmosphere, we'd average the depths that we are transitioning through for the atmospheres. This looks like summing 3.5, 2.5, and 1.5, and then dividing by 3, which equals 2.5 atmospheres. That gives us an additional 1.875 cubic feet and 150 liters of gas used. With a 3-minute safety stop, we'd use an additional 3.375 cubic feet or 90 liters. And that would be about 1.5 atmospheres. This is a total of 8.25 cubic feet and 320 liters used at the surface. Times that by 2 for the 2 divers sharing the gas, we'd need 16.5 cubic feet or 640 liters to surface safely. This is, of course, the bare minimum you'd need, and it's common to add an additional multiplier called stress factor of 1.5 or even higher as a conservative multiplier you feel comfortable with. Because honestly, in a real emergency, one of you will be stressed, if not both, and that's going to increase consumption. Adding that stress factor in will help add an extra buffer of safety to the calculation. For this example, we'll move forward without a stress factor, but I want to stress that you should add your own conservative stress factor of 1.5 or 2 into your calculation. For an aluminum 80 tank with a 3000 psi or 200 bar working pressure, that 16.5 cubic feet or 640 liters translates to roughly 860 psi or 60 bar more than the typical psi or 50 bar reserve many recreational divers rely on. Starting an emergency ascent from 100 feet or 30 meters with only 500 psi or 50 bar in your aluminum 80 would likely deplete your gas before completing your safety stop, forcing a choice between skipping the safety stop or risking an out of gas situation. So I hope that really drives home why calculating your own rock bottom and working with your team for turn pressure is super important than arbitrary safety reserves like 500 psi or 50 bar. I recommend creating a personal rock bottom table for common depths like 40, 60, 80, and 100 feet, or 10, 20, 30, and 40 meters. If you have the space, you can even do more granular depths, such as every 10 feet or 5 meters. And of course, different tanks like HB80s, HB100s, 12 liters, and 15 liters. Laminate this table and keep it in your pocket during the dive, or make it on your wet notes. I always keep wet notes on me, and I can use this quick in a pinch on the dive. And in case you're not familiar with wet notes, they're a handy dandy little pad of paper that you can take on your dives, and they're waterproof with a pen that you can write that is also waterproof. You can't erase things, but you can always tear out pages and flip the page and just keep a whole bunch of stuff, or take notes of fish that you saw. Maybe you can sketch a rare fish that you saw. You can do whatever you like with your wet notes, but it's really handy for rock bottom times for sure. And it's not a particular brand. You can go on Amazon. There's a whole bunch of different types of wet notes. I've used a couple and they're fairly affordable, so they're easy to add to your dive kit. Okay, back to the dive. As you ascend and there are no emergencies, your rock bottom pressure will change, giving you more time to continue your dive. As long as you're staying above your rock bottom gas pressure, you will always have sufficient margin of safety. By shallowing up and staying above this dynamic range of minimum gas, you ensure maximum safety and enjoyment of your dive site. If things do go wrong, no problem. You are ready. You have plenty of gas. And I hope that instills some confidence in you because you are ready. You can handle that emergency and just treat it like a regular dive. Because also remember, stress of an emergency could drastically increase your gas consumption rate. Panic is a serious concern in an emergency. And the more you feel ready, the more confident you feel in yourself, the easier it's going to be to get through that and continue diving another day with your buddy. And before your dive, if you feel that things are a little rough, maybe a new diver or there's especially strong current, if there's challenging conditions, you can use slightly more conservative numbers. One special note that I wanted to share is when you're near the end of your dive, even at 5 meters or 16 feet at your safety stop, pressure gauges become more unreliable when the tank is nearly empty and the first stage will be a little bit harder to breathe from. Because of this effect, it is recommended to always treat 500 psi or 40 bar as the absolute rock bottom value to surface with, even when you're shallow. Calculating your own personal rock bottom will transform your gas management from gut feeling to precision planning. Rather than arbitrarily saving about 500 psi or 50 bar, you'll maintain exactly what physics and physiology demand for safety. This calculation marks the dividing line between recreational guesswork and professional level preparation. And it's the line I'd like you to cross or at least move towards and practice the skills from this video. It will make you a safer diver. But what truly separates recreational from technical divers isn't just equipment or training. It's the systematic approach to gas management that eliminates uncertainty before, during, and after every dive. Yet, gas management doesn't make you a technical diver, but serves to substantially increase your understanding and safety in recreational diving. While your rock bottom calculation provides this crucial safety guidance, it's actually just one component of a comprehensive process that experienced divers implement before they even get wet. I'd love to see you practicing this before every dive, but to get there, we have to make it easy. Sometimes it can be quite chaotic getting into a dive, especially if you've done liveaboards or are on a tight schedule. I know all too well. Once you and your dive team discuss the dive briefing, I want you to ask and confirm the planned dive depth. Let's start with a quick agreement with your dive team on the turnaround pressure. We'll get into this a little bit more in a moment, but let's assume for a normal recreational dive where we can ascend anywhere if something goes wrong, we'll turn around when we reach our starting pressure minus our rock bottom reserve divided by 2, which gives us our turn pressure. Subtracting our rock bottom reserve gives 2000 psi or 125 bar. Dividing in half gives us 1000 psi, and rounding down to the nearest readable pressure on the gauge, 60 bar. That's our turn pressure for the first half of our dive. That's our turnaround point, which stays above our rock bottom reserve. Discussing the turnaround pressure and your rock bottom reserve with your dive team is an excellent practice before the dive. Remember, rock bottom means the rock bottom. While the turn pressure may have some wiggle room, you should never dip below your rock bottom, as that removes all the safety margins if something goes wrong. It's not just putting you at risk, but others who may need to gas share with you. You should always make sure to stay above. To help others who may not know their personal sac rate, it might be also helpful to draw a table for the common standard sac rate I mentioned earlier. This is the very conservative sac rate that you can just use for someone you don't know. It is less personal and it's very conservative, but it provides a general guideline for others in the party who are not aware of their sac rate or not ready to do their own math. That gives you a rock bottom guideline to use for your group for a member that you don't know the sac rate for. Okay, let's talk about different strategies you can utilize for your dive plan. For most recreational dives, it's fine to use the all usable gas or arbitrary turn pressure strategy. This relies on your calculated turn pressure that will be above your rock bottom reserve. It's a more flexible strategy and okay for recreational diving, where you can end a dive and ascend to the surface at any time. Tech or cave divers penetrating a ship, cave, or diving deep use more advanced gas management strategies like the rule of thirds. This is generally not used in recreational diving, but at a high level involves only using 1/3 of the gas going to the destination and allowing 2/3 of the gas coming back. And it's 2/3 because you might have to come back with 2 divers once you get to the destination in an overhead environment. You may also hear about the rule of halves, or halves plus some extra, where you take half of your start pressure plus rock bottom reserve for getting back to the surface. This is the ideal turn at the right time in order to make it back to the boat or entry point. And of course, this is just a high-level view of those strategies. It'll give you an idea of these strategies when other people are talking about them. And what's great about these strategies is they will all accommodate varying sack rates by establishing an agreed upon turn pressure. At the end of the dive, I want you to make sure you're logging all these statistics in your logbook or your wet notes. Log them somehow and keep them handy to keep yourself responsible and see how they change over time. It's not just for recording, it's also for practice to see how your calculations met your expectations. This retrospective analysis can be incredibly valuable to the learning process. It might seem like a little bit extra work at first, but you're building muscle memory that will make things feel more natural, automated, and quick in the future. More importantly, you'll significantly increase your awareness, ability to understand what isn't safe, and enjoy dives without risking your life. The greatest benefit of this systematic approach is the psychological freedom. When you've planned methodically, documented limits, and monitored consistently, the persistent "do I have enough gas" worry disappears. You'll experience dives with greater presence because you've eliminated uncertainty through professional grade preparation. Your next dive presents a perfect opportunity. Calculate your sack rate and create a basic rock bottom table for depths you commonly visit. Make sure to create a table for the generic sack rates as well, and work with your team on a turn pressure. By discussing, practicing, and working on this with your teammates, we can all help keep diving safe and enjoyable. I want to give a shout out to Wouter, an instructor who helped collaborate with me on this video and shared his notes that will help jumpstart you in your gas planning journey. Check the description below where you can download these for free. We've worked on some tables and formulas you can write on your wet notes or print off and laminate that should help you get started and practice. I'm truly glad to have the opportunity to work with Wouter, and he helped make the video even better with his outstanding experience. Thank you, Wouter, for working on this project with me. And anyone else who is interested in working with me, feel free to shoot me an email anytime. Once you're in the game of knowing your sack rate and armed with these wet notes, you're in a perfect opportunity to see how different techniques improve or decrease your sack rate. I have just a video for you to watch next, filled with tips to improve your gas consumption. Check it out here, and until next time.